Well, good evening, good evening, good evening. So good to be with you. Hopefully that didn't come across the wrong way there, George. Hello, sir. It feels like it's been a million years. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad. Good little weekend. Good little big weekend.
Yeah, well, we did a bit of a special on Friday night where we had Jorge Thompson on talking about Hori's pledge and Hobson's pledge and the petition out there to change the name of New Zealand to Aotearoa. And so that was a bit of a different show. It was just me and him having a chat away there. And then, of course, Monday was a Queen's birthday. And now it's Tuesday. It feels like it's been, when you do this every day, kind of 4 days in a row not doing it feels like a really long time.
Yeah, no, it's full on. It's full on. In the weekend, I played the Dune board game, which may as well have taken the whole weekend with, how those board games are. They're
Is it a
very
bit like
complicated.
Risk or something? I've never
Yeah,
heard of Dune.
it's a very complex Risk where depending on the faction you play, you have different strengths and weaknesses. Like, it's very unbalanced game in the sense that, depending on the faction, like you might have, like, for example, the witch faction, can't remember their name. I'm not really into Dune lore, not because I don't like it, just never really was.
Yeah.
But one of their powers is that if they guess who is going to win and on what turn, if they guess that correctly, then they win instead.
Oh.
For example, that yeah, it's amazing. There's this whole sort of cottage industry around these really sort of niche, complicated board games.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all over the country, but there's that store in Dunedin down by Anzac Ave called Megazone or Mega something or other. You go in there and you see some of the board games. We probably buy 2 or 3 board games a year. For a while, I did a bit of a tradition where the kids got a board game on Christmas Day along with whatever their other present was. And it's fascinating, isn't it? And the amount of independent board games out there that you can buy, and they're kind of cool and a bit of fun, and lots of various games that come with cards, like whatever that one is, Against Humanity, something against humanity or something for humanity, whatever that is.
Cards?
But there is it. Yeah, Cards for Humanity. Is that what it's called?
I thought you were joking. Yeah, Cards Against Humanity.
No, I couldn't remember because I'm dumb. But then there's been a plethora of those kinds of, here's the rules to follow, here's the cards, now go and play a game, which are kind of cool because then they come in these little packs and you can, take them up to the batch with you and have a lot of fun with it. No, I like the odd board game, I had a really quiet weekend, actually, not doing very much at all. In fact, kind of did literally nothing on Sunday and Monday. Just chilled out around the house and had my feet up and took a bit of a break and felt good. And kids are back with me because we do 50-50 with the kids. Kids are back with me tomorrow from yesterday, and I'm exhausted again. Space of one day, I'm exhausted again, just having the kids here. So you won't, for people who are only tuning in to see the dog, there's no dog in the studio tonight, and that's because the kids are here. She might turn up at some stage, but I'm very, very much down the pecking order when it comes to fun. I'm at the top of the pecking order when it comes to discipline, but at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to fun. One of my kids has got 2 rats in her room as well. And, they're really friendly and they walk on your hand and sit on your shoulders and that kind of stuff. But the dog just thinks they are the most amazing thing in the world. And so she would spend all her time sitting at the feet of the rats if she could. So, yeah, I'm sorry to break everybody. We'll watch the numbers go like this. I'll go and drop off for all those people who turn up just to see the dog. Yeah. Anyway, speaking of turning up just to see, a bunch of stuff we want to talk about today. I have to say, and I'll tell you why shortly, some of you may already know, but I'm unbelievably proud of Dunedin and the Dunedin community over the last few days. I won't even hint at it for a very, very specific reason, and you'll find out about that as part of our second story today. But Dunedin, it's like big thumbs up. You guys did something brilliant this week that I think most people will be impressed with, and a very, very, very small percent of people will think is Nazi activity by the worst people on the face of the planet. But most of us will think it's a pretty cool story. And also towards the end of this, I always say the hour, because to be honest with you, if you're watching right now, we kind of just get on and do some stories and get off. It seems to be about an hour most nights. But if we finish after 40 minutes, then we'll finish after 40 minutes because we don't have a commercial entity to get to and an ad break at the top of the hour and all that kind of stuff. So the third story we're going to talk about today is to do with Uvalde and the tragic shooting over there. But it seems, and most of you will know this, but if you haven't seen some of the examples we're going to give you, you might be shocked. It seems that for the first time ever in one of these mass shooting events, and there has been about another 10 since Uvalde in the US, that the police are being criticized roundly and appropriately for their response. But it also seems that the police aren't taking too well to that criticism. Maybe they're not considering it constructive enough. And they are pushing back. And they're pushing back in very interesting areas, like against some of the families from the school. They're pushing back against them. And some rumours, and they're only rumours, they're not confirmed yet, and we'll play you a clip to show this, about like the police getting involved in trying hampering, is that word? Trying to hamper? Is it hampering? They're trying to hamper coverage by the media of things like funerals. Now, that's alleged, but we'll show you why it's alleged, and we'll show you where the stories come from as well. However, first, we're going to kick off with New Zealand politics. And we're going to start with a bit of a conversation around Christopher Luxon, our favourite topic of conversation, Mr. Luxon. And actually, before we start with it, I should probably see if I'm still banned from the National Party Facebook page. Hang on, let me just see that. NZ Nat. Yep, I'm still banned from the National Party Facebook page. Okay, fair enough. It's time to check. Maybe they'll let me back in one day. Probably not. Christopher Luxon is rebranding the National Party. So is being reported by, it's actually not being reported by a lot of media. It's a opinion piece written by Guy and Espiner from RNZ, and that piece is all over all other media. I think you can find it on News Hub. Obviously, you can find it on TVNZ, being associated with RNZ. That's an interesting one, actually, George. I never thought about that. Why would TVNZ and RNZ allow News Hub to carry it? Because they're opposition directly. I mean, if you're the ODT and New Zealand Herald, you're a different market. But if you're TVNZ and News Hub, why would they share content? That's really weird.
So it's Creative Commons. It can be republished if it's attributed. It's basically how it works.
And is that, I wasn't quite as clear on that as you're making that sound. So anyone could publish this as long as it's given credit to RNZ for it going out. So anyone could print this. So anyone could make money off this story. That's the thing, right?
It's a funny one.
If this had a pre-roll, or if this had advertising banners around it or whatever, and it was the biggest story in the world, anyone can play it and make money off someone else's work. That doesn't seem right. Anyway, that's a by the by. Maybe you can educate me as we go through the next wee while about that, George. So Guy and Espiner did a sit down with Mr. Luxon. I had a conversation with him, and there are a lot of people on the internet talking about this. And if you search Luxon on Twitter right now, there is quite a lot of conversation going on around Mr. Luxon. There are numerous people claiming that it's a bit of a puff piece, and that people aren't asking Mr. Luxon the questions he needs to be asked. So I'm literally just pulling these randomly. I'm scrolling through and pulling them. So these are all about the conversation off the internet. Two outright lies about Luxon. He never championed the rainbow community. No, not ever. Nobody rates his climate change credentials. Where on earth did you get that misinformation? Looking forward to reading more Luxon/fiction. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And people who are really talking about, and this is a big one actually, the environmentalists. Radio New Zealand, you'll struggle to find an environmentalist who rates Luxon's climate change credentials, especially after what he's done as national leader. So Christopher Luxon doesn't like being described as an evangelical Christian. Maybe he should tell us what he thinks on abortion and reproductive rights. It goes on and on and on. So it's created quite a lot of buzz, this story, and this article in itself. Now, I guess, I know I'm not saying it's a puff piece. I'm saying many are calling it a puff piece. And even if it was, as Kim's just said here, softball interviews don't really sound much like Guyon. a softball interview is not necessarily an inappropriate interview, but it's got to be taken for what it is. If it is, you've actually read more into this interview than me, George. How did the questioning come across to you? Because we don't always have to do a hard hitting interview. You don't always have to ask that next question if you don't want to. How did it come across to you 18 months out from an election?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a soft sort of human interest feature profile, right? By Guy and Espiner.
Yep.
People are focusing on especially this sort of stuff up here that is less likely to actually be Guy and Espiner's own writing. So basically the thesis being, oh, he's actually not basically as it says here, a National Party leader, as it says right there, literally National Party leader. He's actually, as it says here, champion gender pay equity, the rainbow community, etc., etc. The article itself is a bit more nuanced than that, right?
Yeah,
and Guyan is not as sort of sympathetic in the article. Nonetheless, yes, it is one of these sort of soft interviews.
Well, when I say a puff piece is okay, I don't want to. That's quite an offensive term, probably, to a journalist. Puff piece. What I'm saying is a profile piece, a piece that's just learning about the person, is perfectly valid. Michelle Hewlettson used to do a piece on the back page of the Herald. I think it came out every Sunday or Saturday morning in the Herald. It was the back page of the whatever the first section's called. And it was that's what it was. It was all these people, a full page interview with them, and it wasn't really a driving deep into the facts and challenging them. It was actually a profile piece, and there's nothing wrong with the profile piece. I guess a lot of people are now saying, though, within that profile piece, where does the pushback actually come? One of the things I've seen written numerous times online today is if Mr. Luxon claimed to be, pro rainbow tick and pro, rainbow kind of causes, people from within Air New Zealand making the point that there used to be a thing called the pink flights from Air New Zealand. Now, I don't know exactly what those are. I could probably Google them to find out, but I haven't. I'm assuming that they're a branded flight, probably from the uniforms within. You have the pink ball test in Australia for the cricket where they all wear pink, and it's for breast cancer. And it was flights that were put on to go over to the Sydney Mardi Gras. He cancelled those. And then as soon as he left and the new CEO came in, they put them back on again. So there are people saying, well, that doesn't sound very kind of pro-LGBT to them. Are you looking that up, George, or am I just seeing your?
No, I mean, yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean that was I guess a part that people could run with for the article. I was more interested in just getting to know. Well, I was interested in how Guyan was tackling it, but I was also interested in obviously in Luxon's sort of mindset. He does see his years, he sees, for example, his years at Unilever as, these big, great years of rebranding, but also pretty much thinks that I'll just read this quote because I think it sort of indicates who we're dealing with here. You sell everything from Calvin Klein Cosmetics to Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You're in developing markets, developed markets. You're thinking about a global response, a sub-regional response, an individual country response. You work with really uber smart people, and you realize that actually a multinational can actually have a huge difference in the world. He continues, multinationals sees them as a force of good, according to Guy. And a lot of people go into banking or finance or deal making, he says, in an inadvertent dig at his political mentor and friend John Key. For me, actually being in a proper organization that actually made contributions to the society it was part of was important. So somehow, basically he views his role in that world, in the corporate world, as somehow different to the rest of the corporate world. And Unilever is not exempt from some of the bullshit that we see from multinational corporations the world over, right? They're being charged with price fixing. Their factories in South Africa are enforced by local private security that are dodgy as fuck. this sort of thing.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I'm thinking about that when he was saying it was a force for good. Like it sounds like he's saying there's a social agenda to this, which is positive. I mean, I'm fine with Air New Zealand. It's a commercial airline. What if is Air New Zealand a force for good, or is it just an airline? Like when a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, whatever, says the good work we're doing, I wonder how much of that is a social. I say social credit, not like as in the political party, but as in giving themselves social credit and a branding image, like the Clean Green New Zealand thing, a branding image when it may not be necessarily the case. Because I'm trying to think of the quote unquote good work that Air New Zealand might have done, other than flying New Zealanders around the country and around the world.
This is another actually thing I think Guyan does well, is that the reason that people picked up on this article is and summarized it as Luxon is rebranding the National Party is because Guyan really digs into him as a rebrander. And basically, when he says force for good in the world, he means branding, basically, how you brand the company, brand it as a force of good in the world. That might be, maybe have a bit of materiality to it. So, tourism for New Zealand, he got Obama to do a big tourism thing in New Zealand a few years back. That's what he's talking about when he says good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there are some people out there, some commentators out there, some of the general public via Twitter and various other social media sources that are suggesting that maybe his quote unquote rebranding is just also him trying to distance himself from that evangelical right conversation that didn't seem to work well in Australia in the last election, and obviously is fairly toxic on some levels in America as well. So maybe the rebranding of National starts with the rebranding of Luxon, because as goes the leader, often so goes the party. So maybe it's more of a rebranding of him than of National.
I've got one more part, just a bit
please.
more insight into Luxon. I live a very rich life, he says, trying to evade the awkward issue of money. Basically, this is where Guyan's talking about him and his position. I don't have to work. He finally blurts out, I get it. I'm really successful. I've been fortunate. I've been successful, and I'm very grateful and blessed about that. God and money are sensitive topics for Luxon. And this part's interesting. Quote, he was genuinely surprised that wealth and faith celebrated in North America were regarded with suspicion when he returned to New Zealand after an absence of 16 years. Quote from Luxon, I didn't think I'd have to talk about it because I thought I can say I'm a person of faith and that would be fine. So again, you can brand Unilever as I don't know, doing whatever it does for the good in the world. You can also brand yourself as a God-fearing politician that does good in the world, and that somehow, I mean, he was even confused about the fact that people might be interested in the fact, that he's a CEO or that he's worked for these big multinationals at a time. He comes back from America, in the sort of shadow of the Great Recession, confused at why maybe the man on the street is a bit questioning of his role in the world. As for the rebranding of the National Party and him sort of shifting away from, the right-wing evangelical, I think definitely this has come up in past weeks with us as we've sort of noticed him, trying to escape the race question. And we've speculated on how that might, how the co-governance and, that whole big mixed bags of racial issues might be a election sort of topic, a big one that the National Party fronts on in a Don Brash sort of way. And I'm starting to think maybe, and I said this in another show, that he leaves that to his backbenchers and to the ACT Party, right? And he tries to do this whole centrist man of God thing.
Well, I mean, the other thing about this, and not to beat up too much about it, but, and it's not the National Party who have done this, but, when Obama was under Reverend Wright, the conservatives in America made a huge deal about the person that Obama was sitting under for his faith journey. You know what I'm saying? I know a lot about the Upper Room. The Upper Room is the church that Christopher Luxon attended in Auckland. In fact, if you've ever seen any of my Elephant TV stuff that I've done, I don't know if I've talked about that on the show. Have I talked about that on the show? Maybe, maybe not.
Quick
But if
mentions here and there.
but if you've ever seen any of my product that I do called Elephant TV, I'm just bringing up my page to show people. That was filmed in the Upper Room, and I know people who work there, and I know people who are there, and it's it doesn't matter. I'll find another day. So without me trying to burn any bridges by throwing someone under the bus, there's some really problematic theological issues coming out of the church he sat under for a long time, and having someone as sort of a mentorial position over him. So I think it does matter. I remember talking to Don Brash about what happens behind closed doors being as important to a politician as what happens in front of closed doors. Not that I want to know about someone's sex life necessarily, but when you're behind a closed door, that's when you're the real authentic human being, and it's where you get to know the true character of someone. It's the stuff you don't see that makes the true character of someone, not the stuff you do see. Because when you know you're being watched, you can act a certain way. When you don't know you're being watched, that's when you're authentic, completely authentic. Now, some people are authentic both behind closed doors and in front of closed doors, and they're authentic people, but other people aren't. And I don't know. This is not a comment on him per se, because I don't know anything about Christopher Luxon, and seeing I'm blocked on their Facebook page, I probably never will. But I don't think it's. I think it's so naive of him to think people aren't going to care about, these religious beliefs. I mean, look, I mean, someone said it in the thing. What are his comments on the Twitter we're looking at? What are his comments on abortion and euthanasia and cannabis? And a lot of that, for a lot of people of faith, are influenced by their faith. So it's impossible. It's like America try and say there's a separation of church and state, but almost every right-wing politician references back to their faith about why they're doing politics. So it actually, and I actually think it's naive and disingenuous to say I didn't think people would care. If you were any kind of ism or Christianist or whatever, religist, if you were a socialist, or if you were a Satanist, or if you were a, I don't know, hunter, people are going to think that's informing my politics. So I want to know about, I want to know about that person. If you're a farmer, if you're a dirty farmer, I'm not saying all farmers are dirty, but if your farm was particularly dirty and you went into politics, your practice is going to influence your politics. So it's just so naive of politicians to think I didn't think anyone would care, because that's about the person who is going to be influenced by what they think and believe. And if you're a religious person, that's one of the things that mostly influences you, if not completely influences you. So anyway, we should keep going on this though, because we've got caught in a little trap there of talking about that, because the question I just asked, which is, and actually you can answer me this, George, before we go on to this bit, is who and when is then going to push back on those questions? I mean, obviously a profile piece by Guy and Espiner, maybe that's not the place to push back hard, but who does? And it seems that Mr. Luxon today has been getting a bit of a soft kit gloves by the rest of the media, because no one seems to be pushing back against the things he's saying. This was this morning in front of a media scrum. So there's going to be 40 or 30 or 40 or 50 reporters there. And Mr. Luxon was talking about, obviously, the failings of the Labor government. And here's a couple of things he said.
How do you spend $5 billion on education and not improve attendance or academic records? How do you spend $8 billion on social welfare and actually have more people in long-term unemployment benefits when we actually need them in the workforce? How do you spend $2 billion on mental health and not get a single improved outcome?
So not a single pushback by a reporter. So my first question is, being fair, taking a step back, is that the place to push back? Like if you're at a press conference where person X is standing up in front of a scrum of media, is it the job of the journalist then to push back? What do you think on that, first of all, George? Or is that unfair to expect at a press conference for there to be pushback?
No, and to be fair, I think we do see it on occasion. But I think that, and this wasn't it. I saw this press conference, even before it kind of started. It was a pretty low key sort of thing. right? It wasn't like he was announcing some, new member of the shadow cabinet up on the stage or anything like that, right? So it was a perfect opportunity to ask those questions.
So he talked about there's being $5 billion spent on education, and one of the things he cites is the attendance being down. He talked about $8 billion in unemployment, and one of the things he cites is unemployment going up. For a start, unemployment, we're one of the best in the OECD at the moment with our unemployment rate, and one of the reasons we're in a recession is that the Reserve Bank got that wrong. They were expecting there to be more unemployed people. But can I just, that little thing that we have never really talked about, this thing, it's called COVID. I know that my children, for example, were at school far less in the last 2 years than normal practice because of this little thing called COVID. And I would suspect that people have, maybe they're getting back to it now, but for a long time, lost lots of jobs, work's disappeared, businesses have shut down, so employment's going to go up because of COVID. Now, I can't say here's the facts and figures to describe what that is, but it's me pondering out loud. I mean, but no one has said, Mr. Luxon, why do you think education is an issue? Why are there, fewer attendees at school? Is there a reason behind that as far as you're concerned? Why do you have these concerns around unemployment? What's the reason that they just let him say it and then it's a headline? And the last thing, and this is the one I wanted to focus on to talk about what I mean. He says this is the quote, $2 billion on mental health and not get a single improved outcome. So, we've talked about, the squeezed middle as one of their quotes for the next 18 months. Well, this is another one of their quotes for the next 18 months, a single improved outcome from $2 billion. Another one will be inflation-adjusted tax thresholds rather than tax cuts. These are the words. I think on election night, George, we're going to have bingo cards. We're going to have one for National. We're going to have one for Labour. We'll do it during the debates. Yeah. And there's 3 already for National. Inflation-adjusted tax thresholds, the squeezed middle, and not a single improved outcome. You could also have Band-Aid. You could also have pragmatic. These are the words that National is using at the moment. Now, the thing that frustrates me about the $2 billion on mental health and not get a single improved outcome is there was no pushback at all. None whatsoever from any journalist. The journalists that are there basically as our representatives to get the answers and ask the questions. So, Mr. Luxon is claiming not a single improved outcome. That's the claim. Now, that means there is a thing called the black swan theory, which means if you can prove one improved outcome, then his statement is false, right? In 2021, when Judith Collins was the leader of the National Party, Judith Collins talked about the $1.9 billion for mental health. She says to the Prime Minister, and this is from the House, question time, says to the Prime Minister, does she think New Zealanders would have expected their government to have delivered more than just 5 extra acute mental health beds in the 2 years since she announced the $1.9 billion for mental health? Now, unfortunately, and I'm being a little bit facetious here, Judith Collins has actually already proven that there's been 5 extra acute mental health beds. So that's something. I know. I'm being facetious because that's not obviously what they're going. The response from the Prime Minister in 2021. On our mental health program, we were very clear from the outset we wanted to focus on trying to support those New Zealanders who find themselves in our mental health system, and often at the very acute end without necessarily having had support through primary mental health services. So we have been building, so this is what the $1.9 billion has been going towards. We have been building those primary mental health services, and 1.4 million New Zealanders are now enrolled in primary healthcare with access to mental health and addiction services. They're offering 10,000 sessions per month. Those are sessions that did not exist before. Take that alongside funding for Youthline, for our youth health services, the rollout of health services in our schools, manaaki and counselling services in schools. We are building the front end of mental health. When it comes to capital and bed space, the member will know well the time that takes. I understand in 2015, Minister Little, that the one program or project that National funded took over 5 years to deliver. We want to do things more quickly than that, but building buildings and creating bed space does take longer. So the Prime Minister has said there is a process to get to the bed space, but she's listed things in there that they've been doing. Now, Mr. Luxon was sitting in the House when that question was asked. So he's heard that answer, right? So he knows what's been done with some of that money. But just for an extra slap in the face to the media, about 3 weeks ago, Mr. Luxon sat in the House as the leader of the opposition and said of the government was delivering no improvement in area to mental health services in 5 years, a good outcome for spending $1.9 billion. So he's saying it straight to the Prime Minister himself, right? 3 or 4 weeks ago. The response, I would be really interested in what the member considers no action. So if you're doing a checklist, here's the list. When we have 270,000 sessions delivered to date by more than 300 general practice sites covering 2 million people that did not exist before this government. We have 14,000 people every month getting support through that service. That did not happen before this government. We have funded counsellors across 164 schools on top of the counsellors in schools programs many schools already have. We have frontline mental health services like Piki. We've invested in new and existing mental health and addiction facilities. We were able to re-establish the Mental Health Commission, and we've expanded Manaaki to 5 different DHBs. I call that outcomes. So Christopher Luxon says no outcomes. In the House, the Prime Minister says, well, here's a list of outcomes. And then when Christopher Luxon says in front of the media, no outcomes, they'll go, I'll just report that and not push back at all. And it's fucking infuriating. Absolutely and totally infuriating. Now, while I'm on my bandwagon about what's infuriating, this was from Russell Brown over the weekend. He talked about, he put up a post because the other thing that National's talking about at the moment is inflation and blaming it on spending. Now, we've talked many times on the show already about government spending and what little it has to do with inflation. But whatever's causing inflation, whatever you think and whatever people disagree with what they are saying on that, New Zealand is way down here out of the OECD at 6.9%, right? Down here. New Zealand is under Ireland, under the G7 average, under Iceland, under Germany, under the Euro area, under the UK, under the European Union, under the United States, under Belgium, Spain, under the G20, under the OECD. When I say under, I'm meaning less than, obviously. The Netherlands and a whole heap of other countries. Yes, there's inflation. Why is no one pushing back in the media about actually comparable? No one's saying it's great, but comparatively, we're doing pretty well compared to a lot of our peers, a lot of our like-minded, like-situated countries. I'm getting really, really, really frustrated that anyone in I'm just going to check again whether I'm still blocked to see if I'm still blocked. Am I still blocked by the Nats? Yeah, I'm still blocked by the Nats. And it's just, it's driving me wild that there's no pushback. We don't get to, if George and I are getting blocked by the National Party, well, I am, George isn't because he's a good boy, are getting blocked by the National Party on Facebook and getting no response from them. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but what chance is there for you? I mean, we still have microphones, we still have a program, we're still talking each night, we're still having guests coming on, we're still having academics sharing. If we can't get any answers out of people, what the hope is there for the average person just walking up and down the street if the journalists who are standing in front of our politicians aren't fucking doing it? George?
Yeah, I mean, they're in at Parliament itself. I imagine that there is a culture or a sort of a system of using up your points every week with a politician, for example. There's almost I imagine an economy of information, as it were, or you don't ruffle too many feathers with this politician because they won't help you later on. It's that problem of access journalism that we've talked about in the past on an institutional level as well. I mean, they're all mates. They're all friends. We've talked about this as well. Cam Wallace, a friend of Luxon at Air New Zealand, a colleague at Air New Zealand. He's now the CEO of MediaWorks. We talked about Simon Power the other week, the CEO of TVNZ, former Minister of Justice for a national government. And the other one would be Hamish Rutherford, ex-journalist, at the Herald, who is now the press secretary for Luxon. These are all sort of movements that are normal, so to speak, between the journalist sector and the PR sector or whatever it might be. But nonetheless, it's still a fact. It shows that these are all the same people, right? They're all the same people that are in charge of these institutions of media and politics. And so sometimes it's not surprising that maybe that our politicians aren't pushed more. I think that's fair to say.
I didn't realize I was going to do this. I just realized how fucking angry I am. I mean, I really am. I mean, it's like if those who have the opportunity to hold them to account don't, then what's the point? That's exactly what we're seeing in parts of the world where mis and disinformation gets spread through mainstream media. I mean, honestly, what's the point? It's like Luxon said again and again and again, $2 billion on mental health and not get a single improved outcome. I just listed tens, if not hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders that are having improved outcomes from that $2 billion. No pushback anywhere. And then you got fucking Mike Hoskins of the world and the New Zealand Heralds of the world and those guys. I mean, I had a look. I did a bit of Googling around to see if I could find something. And I found an article in the Herald just echoing everything, as an opinion base, echoing everything that Luxon had said. It's like, this is terrible, and there's still waiting lists, and actually said Labor said they'd fix the mental health. It's like, fucking Labor never said that. Who can fix mental health? It's this cycle, and it's infuriating, and it means that we're going to get what we want to do here is we want to lead you to water. I want you to know, and maybe I'll do a post involving all those quotes and put it up at patbritton.com or put it up at my Twitter feed or something like that. And so I want you to have the information so that, and actually, here's a pledge that I will make to you. I will always give you the information that is inaccurate. I don't give a fuck what political party is being inaccurate. I will give you the information, if I have it, on politicians being inaccurate. Yes, we're talking about Mr. Luxon tonight. And yes, it's unarguable and everybody knows it where I sit politically. But if Labor starts doing this and starts horseshitting and bullshitting around, I mean, if you've been watching this for long enough, I've been railing against Labor forever about their withdrawal of masks in schools and stuff. I think it's completely anti-science and populist politics. So don't be watching this and think that we're just these raving lefties who are always going to just smash the right. It's not that at all. I want to smash bullshit. And this is bullshit. It's not good enough. And we deserve better, all of us, from our politicians and from our media. And if they won't do it, we will. And I just hope that can make a difference for some people watching. And I hope that others will find out more about what we do and learn about. We will lead you to water. It's going to be up to you whether you drink or not, but we will lead you there. We'll lead you there and we'll show you what the facts are. We won't even play that stupid game of, we'll see both sides of the equation. So no, there's no both sides of this. He's talking bullshit and we've given you the facts and figures. Right? Labor, about masks in school, they're talking bullshit and we'll give you the facts and figures. We'll lead you to the water and then you are going to have to choose whether you drink or not. Because we're about to go into a story now where you could not lead this person to water and have them drink. Because no matter where in the world they sit, you could have a gold-plated factual answer for you with the source of the answer standing next to you who's done no matter what, these people are never going to drink. We'll lead you there, and then the onus is on you whether you drink or not. All right. I think I'm done. I think I've had a hernia, heart attack at the same time. I'm done. Is there anything else you want to mention on that, George? I know that was a bit of another rant at the end, but I'm over it. I'm fucking over it, man.
No, you're right. I mean, just a little aside would also be that there's a sort of problem with the medium, and this is another thing that has come up for the show as well, is that we have an hour to sit with an expert and this sort of thing. Whereas I think there's sort of almost these inherent problems built into the medium of whether it's the 6 p.m. news or whether, as we saw with Guy Nespina's article, how the headline and the sub-headline was sort of upping the ante per se. And, there's there's an issue there, as well as the sort of institutional dynamics that I mentioned before.
Man, when I see Robert Patman on News Hub and they give him 2 minutes, I just think, fuck,
If
what a
that-
waste.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, what a waste. You know, they think that they think that Robert Patman has the. I mean, Robert Patman is a genius. Don't get me wrong, and we've had him on 10 times, half a dozen times to 10 times. And if they think anyone can unpack what's happening in the Pacific at the moment with China and the Solomons in under 2 minutes, they're just fucking mental. They're just mental. So we have him on for 25 minutes, and we get to the nub of it and we explain it from start to finish, because we lead you to water. That's what we're going to do. That's what we pledged to do. We'll lead you to water. Maybe we should clip this bit out, George. This 4-minute rant of mine is our advert. Maybe we should spread that around, get people to come and start subscribing. You can follow me on Twitter. You guys see it going along at the bottom at the moment. Don't worry so much about TikTok and Instagram, but the things will come out on Twitter. And also follow the YouTube channel, because this is where we are. Anywho, I feel like this would be, if we were a commercial station, this would be a good time for an ad break, because I'd go, okay, calm down now. Calm down.
I mean, we could this is sort of a gear shift. Speaking of good journalism, and
fuck, I'm so proud of Dunedin.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I guess I mentioned journalism because it's critic, and you know that they can. I'm sort of biased because you know lots of the people who end up there come through my doors.
Yeah,
and so I'm sort of. I know it's a sin, but I'm proud.
It's a sin. Hey, listen, if you haven't heard this story, in fact, I'm quite surprised this didn't get more coverage. I wonder if the mainstream media is actually, and I mean, I'm okay with this, they're actually not reporting on this kind of stuff because they don't want to give these sorts of outlets coverage. Probably fair and valid. So everyone probably has heard of this group called Counterspin. They are absolute lunatics. These are the guys that you could lead them to water, but no matter what, they just would not drink, no matter what. So they're doing a tour around the country at the moment called the Fake News Tour or some shit like that. I don't know. What's it called? I've got their Facebook page up here. Hang on. We'll go find there we go. It's the Let's Not Forget. So what they've done is they've made a good amount of money out of the Wellington protest, you know. And at that protest, they were looking for things like someone to provide them a new media vehicle. Like, so they really, really went down that path of, you know, milking that ticket, absolutely looking to make money off it, and without question probably did. And so the Let's Not Forget is like they're trying to continue this thing on. So they're on a tour around the country at the moment. They came to Dunedin, and you beautiful people out there, my fellow Dunedinites, a nationwide tour by Counterspin, a group promoting COVID-19 misinformation. I'd say disinformation as well, but when you say misinformation, what you're saying is you're giving out false information without knowing. It possibly is misinformation, but I don't quite know how you can't know. It's almost like purposeful misinformation if it is. And often violent rhetoric was forced out of Dunedin City after sustained public pressure caused several hosts to pull out. The nationwide tour, titled Let's Not Forget, has stopped in 21 different towns and cities around Aotearoa before arriving in Dunedin. The group had been hosting talks prompting conspiracy theories related to COVID-19 and the Great Replacement. The idea that Jewish elites are promoting mass immigration to replace the white European populace. The theory of the Boston, is it the Boston? The place in America that begins with B, where the shooting just happened a couple of weeks ago. They also promote the common law movement, i.e. the idea that individuals can pick and choose which laws are valid. They originally planned to be hosted by South Dunedin Community Hall run by Otago Darts Association. When critic Te Arohi initially contacted the hall on Wednesday, Administrator Peggy Donaldson told us that we don't care if you're pink, purple, polka dots or whatever, but apparently they draw the line at sustained public pressure to cancel a conspiratorial hangout. So they had to move. And what they moved to was a beautiful church in Dunedin. It's quite near the Octagon. It's a Presbyterian church called First Church. It's an absolutely gorgeous building. So by 1:30 p.m. on Friday, Counterspin had booked their new location for their meeting, the Burns Hall at the First Church by Otago. By the time Critic got through to Reverend Ed Masters, the church minister, it was 1:55 p.m. And based on the exhausted tone of voice, it seemed he'd already gotten tens of phone calls and texts. Reverend Masters told us the church was reviewing the booking. An hour later, the booking was cancelled once again. It is always kind of hilarious to see these groups that stand in the area that the alt-right stands and claim that all the people on the left are the snowflakes and are the weak ones, and that they believe in free speech and they believe in, free economies and, no restrictions. Yet when the market decides they shouldn't be somewhere, they then complain about it. So market forces decided that they weren't going to be in these two halls, but all of a sudden they've become socialists and saying we have a right to be in this hall. So no, that for whatever reason those two places have decided to cancel your booking based on commercial issues, right? And so they booked a hall, they got cancelled, so they had to upload a video here which is saying, we've had to be moved, and then they got cancelled again, so they had to upload another video.
Well, guys, I don't know what to say, but we've been now cancelled for a second time.
Oh, I love you, Dunedin.
In Dunedin.
Oh, you're beautiful.
Within the space of 24 hours. But the good news is we do have a hall that will not be cancelled. They've promised us, and that is the Henley Community Centre, and that's 1218 Centre Road in Henley.
Utterly beautiful. Let me show you where Henley Community Centre is. Henley Community Centre is here. If you can see it, right? Here's Dunedin. So they literally got run out of Dunedin. It is an absolutely beautiful thing. Utterly gorgeous, wonderful, fantastic. And I'm so proud of people in Dunedin who basically went into action and went, this doesn't represent us and we don't want this as a part of our community, and said to the venues, which still could have hosted them, but then the venues decided independently, well, we're not going to have these now. We've heard about it from our constituents, so we're choosing not to host these people. And then they got moved, what is that, 40 minutes out of Dunedin? Something like that, 30 to 40 minutes out of Dunedin maybe. Allenton is where you turn off to go to the airport. That's probably 20, from where I am, it's probably 30 minutes. So maybe 30 or 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. Beautiful. I loved it. George.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for the cancellation of groups like this. I think, totally community-led, sort of rushing them out of town, basically. I was surprised by, because I'd never really paid much attention to Counterspin. I knew that it was the place of these sort of conspiracy theories and stuff like this, but I kind of learned as I looked into it past couple of days after this happening that, that it's also a sort of place for right-wing politics as well as conspiracy theories as well. Like the woman there, what's her name? Hannah something?
I don't know.
She talked about a dangerous mind control program called feminism at the meeting that they eventually had. And they have other members saying that that women need to take a step back, right, and let boys know that they're submissive and this sort of thing. So that, along with Byron C. Clark's reporting on some of the anti-Semitism that also underpins some of these people, is a real mix of shit.
Yeah. And look, the other thing is, I mean, as you all know, you know that I'm someone who has a huge free speech, I fight for free speech. And you might think that I'm being hypocritical now because these guys have a position that's completely contrary to mine. I think free speech does come with strings. You can't threaten to kill someone. You can't shout fire in a crowded theatre, those sorts of rules. And if you're spreading dangerous information, then I have no problems with that being shut down. Dangerous misinformation is actually, I don't think that would come under necessarily a free speech banner. Some may think it might be, but let's use an extreme that's not them. If this was a thing teaching teenagers how to commit suicide, everyone would be in support of it not being under free speech. Then you go down the line as to how dangerous this stuff is. It's maybe not be there, make that clear, but there is a point where you kind of go, well, that's dangerous. That shouldn't be for public consumption. And then you keep on going to where the line is. I guess people are going to say to me now, and it's fair enough, the question is who decides where that line is and where is it? Fair enough.
Well,
happy to take that on board.
Yeah, I mean, two examples for me spring to mind. One of the sort of first protests I ever went to, I was a teenager, was Wellington High, were renting out their space to Destiny Church, and this was around the time of the big, huge Enough is Enough rallies in Wellington.
Yep.
That Destiny Church put on, and we would do counter protests and that kind of thing, and the really, the thinking was that Wellington High School is a place that preached to us students about diversity and all that jazz, and yet was renting out their spaces to Destiny Church. The other, and that's a no-brainer. I don't even think that's a freedom of speech issue to say, no, we don't want them in our place, our school. The other example is the often, the one that's often talked about, and that's universities. There was a big kerfuffle with University of Otago and a bunch of Israeli soldiers that basically wanted to come over and do propaganda for Israel. And their talk was protested and sort of basically shut down. Like I think a sort of university as apparently a collective of people should and be able to come together and say, no, we don't want these people in our lecture hall doing this public lecture, right?
Yeah, I mean, look,
really
not to backtrack at all from me, there is still a line, isn't there? And I mean, we all know the lines over in places like Canada and stuff when they're talking about gender and that kind of stuff. It's not a conversation for today. And I know that some people might think that would trip me up from some of these things, but I do think that the idea of dis and misinformation about a pandemic and is a pretty easy line to draw in the sand and say no. The other thing about freedom of speech to remember, we don't have it like they have in America, but in general it applies to government entities. I mean, a private business saying you can't come into our place anymore and hold your rally is not a freedom of speech issue, because you could just go out on the street and hold it, or you go down to the park and hold it. No one's stopping you from saying it. A private entity is just saying you're not saying it in our space, and that's completely allowed. If it was a government agency saying you couldn't do it, then that's a different situation altogether. So that's something to remember when it comes to freedom of speech. I just wanted to show this as well. This was the meeting that ended up happening in the end, and I've done a bit of a count up of the heads. I could see probably 60 people there. And speaking of diversity, do you want to have a guess how many non-white faces you can see in there? George, you want to have a guess?
I don't know.
If you said 0,
I haven't got my race science binoculars out to measure their heads.
If you said, I mean, you can't see everybody, but if you said very few to 0, you'd probably be quite right, I would think. It's probably a pretty good guess. So
yeah,
well done,
I imagine
Dunedin.
in terms of ideas, it's probably a pretty diverse group of people. They're probably very, there's probably lots of weird ideas that irresolvable or sort of irreconcilable between some of those members, and I mean, I imagine they'd probably disagree with each other on a lot of things, but it's sort of this affective vibe that brings them together in their hatred of Cindy or whatever it might be.
Yeah. All right, let's move into this last story because it's it deserves and warrants to have enough time given to it. The Uvalde shooting in the US, which we're still reeling from all over the world, and obviously since then, I'm sure many of you are aware, there's been a dozen or so more mass shootings in the US. And they try and, politicians there, especially the conservative ones, try and say this is not an issue that happens just in America. Well, not just in America in a singular individual, but the number of them and the propensity of them is absolutely a US only issue. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. So this feels a bit different, though, that for the first time, the police seem to be getting held accountable for their actions or inactions within the situation where the shootings happened. Reports coming out in the last few days that there was bikers being invited by the police to guard the funerals. Now, I think the reporter will say here, we have not had this confirmed by the police, but there are bikers turning up to stop, and you can see that image there to the left of me. I don't know what it is on the screen because it's all backwards. That person is standing, those two people are standing right in front of the camera, trying to stop the cameraman from filming the funerals of the children, from being outside. And the bikers are claiming that the police asked them to come and do
Those are
it.
the ones who told us that they were there on the invitation of the police. We've never been told that by the police. We've tried to reach out to the police chief to register these concerns about how they're treating the media out there. We've not gotten a response from them yet. So it's just been a really incredible, difficult situation, the way they're trying to control access. So now, at least previously, we were sort of across the street from the funeral homes. Now they've started to block off all the roads leading in. We're not allowed to just walk the street across. Reporters are getting told, no, you can't be here. This is not private. This is private property. And we're like, no, we're standing in the middle of the street.
Right.
So on Thursday, one of our reporters was confronted by these bikers who said they were there to help protect the families. And they don't need protection from us. We always treat them respectfully. This is not a fun part of the job. Who wants to go talk? Who wants to approach someone when they're experiencing this, unimaginable loss?
So there you go. So to be clear, and people are saying in the text, the use of bikers for children to intimidate reporters at the funerals are shocking. I want to be careful, not that I even slightly am worried about legal action from America, to hear that it's alleged by the bikers themselves that the police asked them to come and do it. The police have not confirmed that, just so that's completely clear and fair. Now, the other thing that seems to be happening is the police don't seem to be reacting that well to stories of the families, especially the families who were at the shooting while the shooting was going on. This is a story from, and it's one of the mothers who turned up whilst the shooting was going on, has eventually got the courage, and the word courage is right. I'll tell you why she uses the word courage shortly, about what happened when she went whilst the shooting was happening, and she wanted to go inside to get her kids out, and the police arrested her. Now that I'll let her tell the full story. That changed, and she got unarrested, whatever. But her story about inaction from the police firsthand is shocking. And I think you could just probably have a listen to her story first. It's a couple of minutes. So this was a mum who turned up while the shooting was going on and wanted to go inside to get her children, and wanted the police to come with her inside to get the children. And first they refused. First she got arrested, and then they refused.
Right away as I parked, U.S. Marshal started coming toward my car saying that I wasn't allowed to be parked there. And he said, well, we're going to have to arrest you because you're being very uncooperative. I said, well, you're going to have to arrest me because I'm going in there, and I'm telling you right now, I don't see none of y'all in there. Y'all are standing with snipers, and y'all are far away. If y'all don't go in there, I'm going in there. He immediately put me in cuffs.
She says after Uvalde police officers told marshals to uncuff Gomez, she ran towards the school.
As soon as they uncuffed me, I jumped that first gate fence. And once I jumped it, I went to my son's class, and I knocked on the door, and I remember the teacher saying, I'm like, hey, they're already...
So she's running into the school whilst shooting is going on to get her kids. This little mother, whilst the guys with the body armor are all standing outside. Just to be really clear.
They're already bulge cutting the fence to get me. She's like, you think we have time to get out? I said, y'all have time. I'm going to run for my other son.
Once she was assured her son was okay, Gomez ran to get her other child, encountering more officers who tried to stop her.
So I start yelling, and I'm being uncooperative, and I'm like, well, y'all aren't doing what are y'all doing? Y'all ain't doing y'all need to be in here. Give me your vest. Somebody give me a vest, something. I started paying attention to how far the shots were being, so that I knew the shooter was all the way still by my first son's class. So when I went to my second son's door, the teacher didn't want to open the door for me. So that's when they started escorting me out. And as I see that they're opening my son's door, I go run for my son, and I get him.
With both of her kids out safe, Gomez still can't shake the thought of those who didn't make it.
While you were inside the school, did you see officers
There was not
inside
one
the school?
officer inside the school when I ran to my second son's class. There was not one officer.
The reporter says after this, and I don't think I've got this clip to show you, that to be clear that she was in also a different part of the school, so there may have been officers in other parts of the school, just to be fair to the officers in the situation.
And you were hearing gunshots, so you knew
You
that
could hear the
it was an
gunshots.
active shooter.
It was still active. The gunshots were still active. They were not in there. There was no one in there. If anything, when I pulled up, my car was closer to the school than where the snipers and everybody that was laying on the ground were.
When you heard that it took law enforcement 75 minutes before they went in and stopped the shooter, what was your thinking, having been inside the school yourself?
I don't know. I was just thinking that they could have saved many more lives. They could have gone into that classroom and maybe 2 or 3 would have been gone, but they could have saved the whole class. They could have done something. Gone through the window, sniped them through the window. I mean, something, but nothing was being done. If anything, they were being more aggressive on us parents that were willing to go in there. And like I told one of the officers, I don't need you to protect me. Get away from me. I don't need your protection. If anything, I need you to go in there with me to go protect my kids. And if anything, they were being more aggressive on us. They were more pertained on keeping us back than getting into that school.
So that's her story. The bit that's kind of shocking, almost the most shocking part of this conversation, is the reporter now talks about a conversation she had with that mother after the interview. And I guess you'd have to say this is alleged again, but it's alleged that the police are now putting pressure on the families telling stories publicly not to do it.
And she also told me that, you know, she's on probation for some charges from about a decade ago, and that she received a call from someone in law enforcement telling her that if she keeps talking to media, or if she, you know, keeps sharing her story, that she might face some kind of violation for obstruction of justice. So she was holding back from sharing her story until now because a judge told her that she was brave and that her probation would be shortened. So that gave her the courage to talk to us. Her uncle's the one who called me and said, you have to hear her story, and I'm so glad he did. And I'm so glad we also met her in the field. She told me, for me, it's important that you come here and you see how hard we work in this heat under the sun. And by the way, there was another parent whose story I'll be sharing later, who lost his son and was still there at work under the sun.
So there you go. I guess, as I said, to be fair, we will always try and be fair. That the last comment made by the mum to the reporter is alleged. I mean, the only person that knows that is the mother herself, and if there was a police officer on the other end of the phone. But it's not the only report of police putting pressure on families of children, families of victims, of putting pressure towards media to not fully report this story. And I heard a commentator say today from the US, because in 2 weeks' time from now, those news trucks won't be there. And what they're assessing, or what they're asserting, is that if the police and if the sheriff and if the people within Uvalde who should have been responsible for more help can keep their head down for a couple of weeks and kind of ride out this cycle, then they'll be over it. Like they'll not have the consequences coming towards them for the incredible poor job they did to protect and serve.
Yeah, I mean, I totally wouldn't be surprised if it's true, and I have no reason to not think it's true. The local police are under immense media attention, right? And so it makes sense that, and I mean, for all we know of American police, they're very sort of loyal to themselves, right? To their sort of close knit organization. So yeah, totally not surprised there. Maybe a little bit surprised that on a state level or a federal level there hasn't been more sort of intervention. I mean, you got stories of allegedly hiring bikers to intimidate news reporters. You got stories of intimidating a mother of the school, right? This is when, authorities up the rung of the hierarchy step in, because that's supposedly where the buck stops is, people up top.
I guess as well, what I hear you saying is the further up the chain need to get involved, and if they're not getting involved, does that lend more weight to these accusations? Because they don't want to come out and deny things that actually are happening. They can't come out and say anything like, these things aren't happening. I unequivocally denounce any kind of accusations. What if they are?
Well, even even just some sort of federal investigation into the shooting usually takes place. So that could be wrapped up in all that anyway. And that would possibly help it not just fall away in 2 weeks. Because it might be a good, solid, clear example of the local police really, really fucking up. But yeah, I don't know. I've got no faith. Unlike our mate Christopher Luxon, no faith, no faith here.
I'm just having a look at the. It hasn't been updated recently. There was a site. I can't find the site. The site that we were using around the shooting that was talking about the number of mass shootings in America, and it was like, what was it, 215 or something, and seeing what they're up to. I saw a number that said 245. Like this is, I can't think of another word for this. Look, check this out, right? Well, I don't mean for us to go to bed depressed or anything, but look at this headline. 13 mass shootings over the weekend. 13. And that came out 21 hours ago. That's the weekend just gone. Now, not every mass shooting is also a mass killing, but there was 13 mass shootings in just the weekend that's just gone. It's madness. Madness. All right. Any comments that we want to get out there? What does Kim say? I think blaming the cops, although legitimate, has become a distraction from politicians not doing anything in the gun legislation space. Yeah, I think that's probably fair, Kim. And I think that politicians won't be able to avoid it. I think it's not necessary. It might be a distraction, but I don't think it's going to take the ire and the focus off gun legislation. I don't know if you watch Last Week Tonight, George, but John Oliver Last Week Tonight did one on cops in schools. That was the topic for this week, the 27-minute topic. And he very simply went, well, we all know what the solution to the mass shootings are, and that's sensible gun regulation. And then they went on to their actual story. And then at another stage he went, well, but we know what the answer is. It's sensible gun regulations. And then they went on to the other story talking about actually having police officers in schools. Statistics shows often causes more deaths and more harm. And kids will get put in the back of a squad car for, he used examples like throwing darts at people and throwing a baby carrot at someone, got arrested for assault. And then that impacts them getting into college because they have a criminal record. And that because apparently on the college application it says, have you ever been arrested? That's the question, not have you got a criminal record? And they have to say yes. And when they say yes, that hinders their chances of getting into college, which starts a cycle of potential poverty, which then is a cycle that leads to things like crime. So it was a really interesting thing. If people don't watch it, you should check it out. I'm not even sure if it shows in New Zealand. I watch it online, but Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, you can probably find it on YouTube. They just put in police officers in schools. I'm sure the story will come up. Alrighty, Mighty. George, that's us done for tonight. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, all good.
Thanks, guys, for joining us again tonight. I apologise if it felt a little bit ranty tonight, but I think when we were talking in radio, the boss used to say, I heard you blew a foo-foo valve last night, meaning it was just enough. There was something that had got to the top and blown out the lid. It feels a bit like that tonight, but how frustrating it is to watch our pathetic media brown-nosed politicians and not ask simple questions. It's not even a challenging question. What's your metric for that statement that there's not get a single improved outcome? How do you measure that, Mr. Luxon, that there's not a single improved outcome? Nothing. Literally nothing. Shall I check if I'm still banned? I wonder if I am. Do you reckon they've should I have a look? Let's have a look. Oh no, look, I'm still blocked by National on their Facebook page. Maybe one day they'll let me back. Do you think after tonight's show they'll let me back? Maybe not. Maybe not. Ka kite anō. Thank you, team. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow night from 10. And I appreciate everybody's time. And remember, share our shit. I'll probably do a couple of clips tomorrow morning. Someone has suggested that we call the thumbnail crazy. With that big blow up I just had about leading people to water, the thumbnail should read, "Is New Zealand media corrupt?"
We'll do that when it's a bit more of a sophisticated, considered approach to that question.
Oh, are you saying that I was a little bit too over emotional, George? It wasn't considered. All right.
I don't know. I was chucking shit out there too.
All right, team. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, George. We'll catch you all from tomorrow night.